Men of our city, Argive elders here, I shame not in your presence to avow my wifely temper. Bashful fear in time from mortals dieth, not by others taught, but from myself. The wretched life I'll tell, 'twas mine to lead while this man was at Troy. First, for a woman severed from her mate, to sit forlorn at home is grievous woe. Hearing malignant murmurs manifold, one courier comes, another in his train worse tidings brings to echo through the house. And as for wounds, had my dear lord received as many as report kept pouring in, a net, methinks, had not been more transpierced. Or had he died as oft as reported, then a second triple-bodied Geryon, a threefold cloak of earth he must have donned, enduring death in every form he wore. Thus harassed by these ever-rife reports, full often from my neck have forceful hands seized and untied the beam-suspended noose. And for this cause, our son, pledge of our troth, of mine and thine, stands not beside me now, as stand he should. Orestes, marvel not, for him thy trusty spear guest nourisheth. Strophius the Phocian, who hath me forewarned of twofold peril, thine neath Ilion's wall, and next, lest clamor-fostered anarchy hazard the plot, for 'tis with men inborn to trample further him already down. This pretext, trust me, carries no deceit, but for myself the gushing founts of grief are all dried up. No single tear is left. Sore with late watching are my weary eyes, weeping the fiery beacons set for thee, neglected ever. Often from my dreams was I awakened by the tiny hum of buzzing gnat, seeing, endured by thee, more woes than could have filled mine hour of sleep. These sorrows past. Now with a heart unwrung, I hail my husband, watchdog of the field, sure forestay of the ship, of lofty roof, pillar firm based, sire's sole begotten child, land beyond hope looming to mariners, day after storm most brilliant to behold, to thirsty wayfarer, clear gushing spring. Sooth, sweet it is to scape from harsh constraint. With such addresses do I honor him. Let envy stand aloof, for we have borne ere this full many a woe. And now, dear my lord, come from thy car, but on the ground, O king, plant not thy foot that trampled Ilion. Maidens, why tarry ye, whose duty 'tis with carpets to bespread his stepping floor? Swift, purple strew his passage to a home unlooked for, even as justice may conduct what further she decreeth with the gods. Thought, not by sleep or mastered, shall dispose.
Where am I? Fled is the kindly light. Deep darkness blinds my eyes, and the sky buried in gloom is hidden away. But see, with the double sun the day gleams forth, and double Argos lifts up twin palaces. Ida's groves I see. There sits the shepherd, fateful judge midst mighty goddesses. Oh, fear him, ye kings, I warn you. Fear the child of stolen love. That rustic foundling shall overturn your house. What means that mad woman with drawn sword in hand? What hero seeks she with her right hand? A Spartan in her garb, but carrying an Amazonian axe? What sight is that other which now employs mine eyes? the king of beasts, with his proud neck by a base fang lies low, an Afric lion, suffering the bloody bites of his bold lioness. Why do ye summon me, saved only of my house, my kindred shades? Thee, father, do I follow, eyewitness of Troy's burial. Thee, brother, help of the Phrygians, terror of the Greeks. I see not in thine old-time splendor, or with thine hands hot from the burning of the ships, but mangled of limb, with those arms wounded by the deep-sunk thongs. Thee, Troilus, I follow, too early with Achilles met. Unrecognizable the face thou wearest. Deiphobus, the gift of thy new life. 'Tis sweet to fare along the very Stygian pools, sweet to behold Tartarus' savage dog and the realms of greedy Dis. Today the skiff of murky Phlegethon shall bear royal souls, vanquished and vanquisher. Ye shades, I pray, thou stream on which the gods make oath, thee no less I pray for a little withdrawn the covering of the dark world, that on Mycenae the shadowy throng of Phrygians may look forth. Behold, poor souls, the fates turn backward on themselves. They press on, the squalid sisters, their bloody lashes brandishing, their left hands half-burned torches bare. Bloated are their pallid cheeks, and dusky robes of death their hollow loins encircle. The fearsome cries of night resound, and the huge body's bones rotting with long decay lie in a slime marsh. And see, that spent old man, forgetting thirst, no longer catches at the mocking waters, grieving at death to come. But Father Dardanus exalts and walks along with stately tread.
Not one exists whose sorrows equal mine, unless you of calamity herself would speak. Yet hear the motive why I clasp your knees. If I appear to merit what I suffer, I must be patient. But if not, avenge my wrongs upon the man who 'gainst his guests would such treachery could commit, who nor the gods of Erebus beneath, nor those who rule in heaven above regarding this vile deed did perpetrate, even he with whom I oft partook the feast, on whom I showered each bounty, esteeming him the first of all my friends. Yet, when at Ilion's palace with respect he had been treated, a deliberate scheme of murder forming, he destroyed my son, on whom he deemed not to bestow a tomb, but threw his corse into the briny deep. Though I indeed am feeble and a slave, yet mighty are the gods, and by their law the world is ruled. For by that law, we learn that there are gods and can mark out the bounds of justice and injustice, if such law to you transmitted be infringed. If they who kill their guests or dare with impious hand to violate the altars of the god unpunished escaped, no equity is left among mankind. Deeming such base connivance unworthy of yourself, revere my woes. Have pity on me. Like a painter, take your stand to view me and observe the number of my afflictions. Once was I a queen, but now am I a slave. In many a son I was once rich But now am I both old and of my children reft, without a city, forlorn, and of all mortals the most wretched. That band of my heroic sons is now no more. Myself a captive, am led forth to tasks unseemly, and e'en now these eyes behold the air obscured by Ilion's rising smoke. It might be vain, perhaps, were I to found a claim to your assistance on your love. Yet must I speak. My daughter, who in Troy was called Cassandra, the prophetic dame, partakes your bed. And how those rapturous nights will you acknowledge, or to her show your gratitude for all the fond embraces which she bestows, O king, or in her stead to me, her mother? In the soul of man, the endearments of the night, by darkness veiled, create the strongest interest. To my tale now listen. Do you see that breathless course? Each act of kindness which to him is shown upon a kinsman of the dame you love will be conferred. But in one point my speech is yet deficient. By the wondrous arts of Daedalus or some benignant god could I give voice to each arm, hand, and hair, and each extremist joint, they round your knees should cling together, and together weep, at once combining with 1,000 tongues. O monarch, O thou light of Greece, comply, and stretch forth that avenging arm to aid an aged woman, though she be a thing of naught. I'll succor. For the good man's duty is to obey the dread behests of justice and ever punish those who act amiss.
Fit offspring of a fatal stock. Thine is the blood of Atreus and Thyestes, thy daughter's murderer. There but remains one horror more, to serve her as a feast before her mother. Savage, this is then the gladsome sacrifice thou wast preparing with artful care? Did not thy hand refuse the infamy of writing a command so cruel? Why dost thou pretend to feel a false distress? Think not the tears can prove a love that shrinks from bold defense in arms. Why has not blood been shed for her in torrents? What wreck and ruin till of thy resistance? What field of corpses covered seals my mouth? Proofs such as these I would have had thee bring me of thine affection and desire to save her. A fatal oracle ordains her death. But what an oracle may seem to say, not always is its meaning. Can just heaven thirst for the blood of innocents, or be honored by murder? If for Helen's crime her kin are punished, for her daughter sent to Sparta, so let Menelaus ransom the wife whose frailty in his eyes seems small matched with her charms. But surely it is madness to make thyself the victim of her sin. And why should I, smiting upon my breast, with my own flesh and blood, pay for her folly? Does Helen then, for whom such jealous fires were kindled, curse of Europe and of Asia, seem worthy of thine efforts to regain her? How often have we blushed to speak her name? Heir to his woe, thy brother linked his fate with hers. She had been carried off by Theseus, who, as thou knowest and hast heard from Calchas 1,000 times, clandestinely loosened her virgin zone. And pledge of that armor, a princess of her blood, has been by her kept in concealment. But a brother's honor is the least of thy solicitude. The lust of empire nothing can extinguish. The pride of seeing 20 monarchs serve and fear thee, empire to thine hands confided. These are the gods who claim this sacrifice from thee, who far from offering resistance does make a barbarous merit of submission. Jealous of power that can excite their envy. Thou dost not grudge to pay a heavy price from thine own veins, that so thou mayst quell all opposition to thy sovereign sway. Is this to be a father? Outraged nature revolts at this perfidious cruelty. A priest, surrounded by a brutal crowd, will on my child lay hands of violence, rend her bared bosom, and with curious eye for omens search her palpitating heart. While I, who brought her hither, proud and happy, must needs go back alone and in despair. Still will thy ways be scented with the flowers that neath her feet were scattered as we came. It shall not be that to her doom I brought her, or thou wilt have to add my death to hers. Aye, thou shalt never tear her from these arms while life is mine. No fears can shake my purpose. Ruthless alike as husband and as father, come, if thou darest, snatch her from the breast that nursed her.
Hi. Welcome to Reading Greek Tragedy Online. I'm Joel Christensen from Brandeis University, and I'm here with an amazing cast brought together by director Liane Noble. We have, you just saw Colleen Longshaw, Ayanda, Nhlangothi, KaNokwe, Tamieka Chavis, and Kim Bay perform. And soon after, you'll see Rad Pereira, Evelyn Miller, Nori Victoria, and Nikauri Rodriguez, brought together for this episode called Goddess and Women of the Gods. We have monologues from some speeches, monologues from Greek tragedy, and some special things coming in the second half. And we have two special guests with us today, Suzanne Lye and Jackie Murray. So I want to bring them to get in right away to talk about both the monologues that we just witnessed, but also sort of the project of bringing together these speeches into one performance. So first, Suzanne, how are you doing? And Jackie, join me too.
Great. Thanks for having me, CHS and Joel.
Yeah, me too. I'm glad to be here. This is a fantastic performance so far.
So do you guys want to start with some initial responses? So what's sort of the impression that you're getting, or sort of emotions coming over you at seeing these speeches?
You want to go first, Suzanne?
I was going to offer for you to go first, but it's one of these things. I can't, every time I hear or read, these plays or these passages, like I just have so many ideas. I have like a Post-its that I was just writing up as we were, as the readings were happening. And, I feel like often, and I know we're just seeing small parts, but often when you see women in these performances, they're often at these very high registers of emotion. And sometimes I was just thinking, and I know it's tragedy, but I was just thinking about why, if you look at epic, you see men in a high state of emotion, right? And for tragedy, the focus is on often women in a high state of emotion and these extreme states. And so, one of the questions I often ask myself is just, are these women, a foil, to balance off, the received stories of the strong emotions elsewhere from men in battle and things like that? Or are they a way to explore like the range of emotion and humanity? So those are kind of things that, just thoughts that were bubbling up. And, in this sort of the range of humanity, being able to explore it in this kind of like safe space, this, encapsulated space, like a case study, to look at, is it about emotion or is it about gender? This is the thing that I always am thinking about.
Jackie?
Yeah, I kind of like what you said there, Suzanne, about whether it's emotion or gender. And yeah, and the idea that, well, is it really not just another way of sort of in glorifying how important the men are, right? Because without the men, or whether they're the dead sons or the dead husbands, or the actions that the men do that negatively affect the women, somehow it's still somehow centered. Tragedy still, even though the women are the dominant figures, tragedy still somehow centers the men, right? They're always talking about the men and the impact of men on them, and usually that's a negative impact. We might it's usually not positive. Yeah, so yeah, it does make you wonder whether it's the range of emotions and then the normative human emotions are all sort of male centered, or is there really a female gender difference? Are we actually getting a female perspective in a way? Slightly, I think, because mothers of course can be presented this way, but yeah.
Can I just build on just
Sure.
something I was thinking about? And so one of the other questions I have on my post-it notes is like, what is allowable as the emotion that women can represent? And distress, grief, anger. But in a way, with what you were saying about these women still being, the focus still being men, it does seem like you can't actually process what's happening with the men without seeing the like they provide this audience, this internal audience to that tell you the external audience how to react to what has happened to the men. And so there is that. And I was just wondering about like what's allowable for these women to represent. Like, can you have just a normal or a stoic sort of female character? I don't think so. Like, they just don't have that range.
And, Jackie, what you said reminded me of sort of the quandary I always find myself in when talking with students about how we recuperate women's stories from the ancient world, right? One of the things I usually resort to is talking about, the fragmentary catalog of women that's centered sort of women's lives and stories. But as you smartly point out, these stories are still connected to men, the men who suit them, the sons they have. And while we focus more on their experience and suffering, it's still sort of, joined together to sort of these central heroic male characters. But these women that we have on stage today, like Clytemnestra, Cassandra, Hecuba, and Clytemnestra again, have somewhat like different stories. Like Clytemnestra is really an agent on her own. And so, what's sort of the effect of decontextualizing these speeches and put them together? Do they seem new to you or strange?
Well, I was going to look at the two Clytemnestra speeches together because I did think that it was really good to bring them together. And what I think, especially in the very last one, where you get her relating her relationship to her daughter and her relationship to her sister, right? So you get these mother, daughter, sister. That's brought out in that speech really carefully, and I thought that is, when you decontextualize it, you start to think, what is wrong with Helen? Why are you willing to sacrifice my daughter for her? And I'm talking as her sister here, right? And I thought that was interesting. But it's still the shaming though of Helen comes in as well, because there's the whole dredging up of her potential relationship with Theseus, and maybe she even has a hidden child, all that stuff. We have to dredge out the sort of her back history. Shaming needs to happen. So again, that seems to sort of fit, within a sort of discourse of, I guess, male-centered patriarchal discourse about what's appropriate for women to do. So there's no sympathy, in other words, on from coming from Clytemnestra toward Helen, right? Not that, and Helen is in tragedy the most unsympathetic character, I think, in these tragedies, these Trojan women, this one, and others, right? So you get that even her sister can't muster any sympathy for her, and I think that's kind of interesting. And there's no possibility that she might have actually just been abducted, right? Like, no. She went of her own free will, right? So, yeah. What do you think, Suzanne?
Yeah, Suzanne.
Yeah, I really liked the side-by-side of Clytemnestra because it just really shows, like, you can't just flatten these characters, even though different authors might try to. Even Helen, right? You can't just flatten her. She's too intriguing in many ways. The other thing, what Joel was saying about Clytemnestra being an agent, one of the things that I'm working on, one of my projects here at the center, is about women's anger and how that is actually something that allows women to act as agents in Greek literature. Like that's one of the few times they can like do things that affect others, including men. And so it's like the setup that allows them to. And so so hearing these women in, like, and anger, what I mean by anger here, it's not this, like, what I'm finding in my research is that women's anger looks very different from men's anger, and it manifests in different ways. And it's often through a mother-daughter relationship or, female, like, peers, like caring about each other, friends sometimes. And so it is just you do kind of see this when you see these particular women, and some of the readings I think that are coming up together, you see that there is this, I guess, this trope or this characterization of certain emotional ranges that allow for female agency, whether it's extreme grief or extreme anger, which often look the same actually in how they're played out. And I often think as well as just we as modern audiences, we're reading it probably quite differently than ancient audiences did, interpreting what is a good emotion or bad emotion or a type of, grief or a type of anger. So anyway, that's what I thought about.
Because Clytemnestra is coded very differently in the Agamemnon for ancient audiences than she might be for ours, right? But again, we can't assume that all ancient audience members would have responded the same, right? And so Jackie said something interesting about how we have this sort of leveling of women's characters, right? And I think what's interesting with Helen and the comments about Helen is a separation from that force. And I think back to book 24 of the Odyssey, when Agamemnon claims, well, no matter how good a woman is, they're all going to be tainted by the story of Helen. But here, the Clytemnestra in Euripides is separating herself from her and saying, no, like, she's not worth it. She's different. And so we get this effect that sometimes modern readers especially sense in tragedy, that the women truly are differentiated as characters, right? That they really have a life to them that maybe sometimes they don't always get in epic or other genres. Jackie, do you think we're reading too much of ourselves in there, or in your reading of ancient Greek tragedy, do you think women are differentiated and real in that way too?
Well, I agree with you that they are, that we tend to read a little bit of ourselves into it, but I do think that there is in the tragedies an attempt to make them different, because if we focus on, say, the presentations that we just saw of Cassandra and Hecuba too, again, you get other characters. How in the case of Cassandra, I thought it was really well done. Tamieka did a great job of showing how, the shock of, like, ending up in some foreign land and not even know what's going on, but also by a character who is known to supposedly know too much and can't express it, right? I thought that only women characters get that possibility, right? That they know a lot they're the purveyors of knowledge, but they're containers of knowledge, but they can't seem to express it properly or accurately or intelligibly. So the Pythia and Cassandra here, like
the underworld.
Yeah, the underworld, right? Yeah, where mom can't talk, and so it's like they know a lot. So the Greek poetic world knows that women know a lot, right? But even we can think of the sirens too. It's like we only get to hear what they say from Odysseus, right? So they know a lot, but we can't access it. So there's kind of an awareness that we're just not gonna let women say a lot or say what they know in completely, right? Or if whatever they know, it's hard for the audience to get at. And so and I thought also the Hecuba is another one where the idea that like the whole premise of the Iliad, say, right, is ultimately the disrespect that can potentially happen to the bodies on the battlefield, right? That you can leave your enemy's body and you can mistreat your enemy's body, right? It could go too far, right? That's ultimately how I usually boil it down for my students. Is the theme is, how are we going to treat this enemy? Are we going to treat him as a human or are we not? And so she's really concerned about the fact that her son's body has been disrespected in this way, right? And that's a normal, that's a male perspective, right? So she's even given this whole, like the women seem to have that universal perspective, right? Where they have the male, what men can understand. Like your son's body was left on the battlefield or mistreated on the battlefield or drowned or whatever. It was treated badly. You can get angry about that. But somehow she's not allowed, she's seen as she ultimately gets the epithet of kunos, right? Dog, right? Because of how rabidly angry she is. But is it really like any, like it's a legitimate anger according to the Iliad, right? Like that is what Manus produces, right? Is this this bodies lying out on the battlefield. So so in a way women can represent, like going back to Susan's point, that women seem to be able to represent the range of human emotions in a lot of ways there.
Yeah, can I just think that I forgot about the kunos descriptor, but that's also a way that Helen describes herself in the Iliad. My dog nature, my dog-faced Helen is another way that she's described, and it's like women kind of are boundary crossers in terms existentially. And I was just thinking, as you brought up Cassandra, what's interesting about her is she is alone in a way that no other character can ever be, and yet like she still has to be alive, but a lot of the male characters, even when they're sitting, like Achilles is sitting alone in his tent. No, he's not actually. There are like there are other guys around, his other companions and things like that. But Cassandra and even Hecuba in that moment, they're just like almost purely alone, even as they're talking. But Cassandra more than Hecuba, because she never gets connectivity with other humans. Like they don't believe her ever, right? And so I feel like these characters represent a form of existence that may actually overlap in the audience with people who may feel marginalized in different ways. And so that's one of the things I think about as well, is like, if we're talking about male poets, male actors, a male milieu of, presenting these plays, like, so what are they seeing in these women, right? And what do people steeped in the patriarchy see in these women? And maybe it's power differentials. That might be another way of looking at what these women represent.
And one of the things I like that both of you have highlighted is the way that these speeches are in a way tapping into traditional positions for women in Greek myth and poetics. So, a lot of times what we see in the Iliad and epic and early myth in general is that women have special knowledge over life and death, right? They can see into the future, they have control over birth. And part of what unites Colleen's Clytemnestra, Ayanda's Cassandra, Tamieka's Hecuba, and Kim's Clytemnestra there is this ability to see the future of death and what happens later, but also this unique marginalization that comes from suffering through this knowledge and being able to not affect it at all. I mean, Tamieka's Hecuba is harrowing, and Ayanda's Cassandra is there, really sort of a calm stillness for Cassandra, whose speech is actually filled with music, right? And so one of my sort of closing questions for you is how does the anachronistic blending of these together, taking away the music and that range of emotion and performance into the sort of single faces and reading of the screens, change the experience for you? Like, how, as sort of modern viewers, as women, how do these speeches in this context sort of make you refocus on these figures from myth? Maybe it's Jackie's turn. I lost, or Suzanne, if you want to start.
I was gonna go with Suzanne, but
okay. Yeah.
Well, I've come to love this the way the CHS is doing these this kind of thing. So to me, it's always very powerful to see it in isolation, because then you're sort of focused on the words and the performance, what the actors bring to the words, and you get a particular sort of imagining of what the character is feeling and saying. And I think that it's in isolation that is very powerful. I find it very thought-provoking too, because it gives you, okay, that's another way of thinking about it, that these actors kind of bring to it, and especially since they're marked off, and you can just see their faces and see how they're bringing the emotions to what they're saying, and just drawing you in that way. And so, yeah, I think I find it very, very, very powerful. I that's why I like this whole experience. So, what about you, Suzanne?
Yeah, I really like this, because for me, the point of comparison is mostly I read these things, right? And so it's in silence. So I think the more we can bring in other senses into this, the more realistic it is. The one thing, I'm a fan of musicals and live performances, really. And I think this series is amazing, and it actually works really well. I think that the 3D experience, though, is another level of taking it in, because one of the things, like when you see, I mean, even one of these, but if you go to one of the spaces where this was performed and you see the natural environment that's there, and and the actual air you're breathing outside, and or if you see, these plays performed even in the in the US in modern times, whether they include singing or not. I mean, I feel like there are things that impact you when you see the performance in 3D with a full array, that it continues to impact you in a way beyond the event of watching, in a way that doesn't seem to happen in the same way with reading or even watching on a screen like this. So I think that it's like different shades on, like a color wheel, like a palette, and the vividness is adjusted based on how many points of access to the senses you're allowing.
And one of the things, with that, comparing to the ancient world, in ancient performances, these roles were played by men in various costumes to mark them as women, right? In this scene, right, in the way that we do it, it's different, right? We're not used to that sort of performance, and we're definitely coded differently. So looking forward to the speeches that are coming. Are there particular moments or themes that the two of you are anticipating and want to hear more about, or are you just sort of like ready for whatever comes? Well, I'll start with Suzanne this time.
I was just looking at the list. I love the Homeric Hymn to Demeter is one of my favorite, and partly because it's just, pure, like the mother-daughter aspect is so pure, and so it feels so real. And then the other ones, like Tecmessa, is my students love reading the Ajax because of Tecmessa and her role. Like, what is her status and how does it change, and how is it, hooked to the male characters, right? And her status and her identity. So I think looking at the identities and how they are fluid between, each character, each female character has this fluidity of identity, in the characterization. So I would say just pay attention to that.
Jackie?
I'm excited to see the range that's going to go from, like, as I said, him to Demeter, and then we're going to get the nurse in Hippolytus, who is it, and then Lysistrata.
Yeah.
I just want to see that flow of the jumping from one very different to the next, very different to the next, very different, because certainly the Demeter ode is way different than like Clytemnestra.
Right. And it's not usually something you read right next
together.
to
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
You'll never put them together or think to put them together. Yeah.
Well, after the next few performances, we'll be able to bring Leonie Noble to talk to us about some of the decisions and talk to the actors. So I'm looking forward to that as much. But for now, we're going to turn to Rod Pereira with the Homeric Ode to Demeter.
I begin to sing of Demeter, the holy goddess with the beautiful hair, and her daughter, Persephone, too, the one with the delicate ankles whom Hades seized. She was given away by Zeus, the loud thunderer, the one who sees far and wide. Demeter did not take part in this, she of the golden double axe, she who glories in the harvest. And Persephone was having a good time, along with the daughters of Okeanos, who wear their waistbands slung low. She was picking flowers, roses, crocus, and beautiful violets, up and down the soft meadow. Iris blossoms too she picked, and hyacinth, and the narcissus, which was grown as a lure for the flower-faced girl by Gaia, all according to the plans of Zeus. Gaia was doing a favor for the one who receives many guests, Hades. The narcissus was a wondrous thing in its splendor. To look at it gives a sense of holy awe to the immortal gods, as well as mortal humans. It has 100 heads growing from the root up, its sweet fragrance spread over the wide skies up above, and the earth below smiled back in all its radiance. So too the churning mass of the salty sea. Persephone was filled with a sense of wonder, and she reached out with both hands to take hold of the pretty plaything. And the earth, full of roads leading every which way, opened up under her. It happened on the plain of Nysa. There it was that the Lord who receives many guests made his lunge. He was riding on a chariot drawn by immortal horses, the son of Kronos, the one known by many names. He seized her against her will, put her on his golden chariot, and drove away as she wept. She cried with a piercing voice, calling upon her father Zeus, the son of Kronos, the highest and the best, but not one of the immortal ones or of human mortals heard her voice, not even the olive trees which bear their splendid harvest, except for the daughter of Perseus, the one who keeps in mind the vigor of nature. She heard it from her cave. She is Hecate with the splendid headband. And the Lord Helios heard it too, the magnificent son of Hyperion. They heard the daughter calling upon her father, the son of Kronos, but he, all by himself, was seated far apart from the gods, inside temple, the precinct of many prayers. He was receiving beautiful sacrificial rites from mortal humans. She was being taken against her will at the behest of Zeus by her father's brother, the one who makes many semata, the one who receives many guests, the son of Kronos, the one with many names, on the chariot drawn by immortal horses. So long as the earth and the star-filled sky were still within the goddess Persephone's view, as also the fish-swarming sea with its strong currents, as also the rays of the sun, she still had hope that she would yet see her dear mother in that special group, the immortal gods. For that long a time, her great noose was soothed by hope, distressed as she was. The peaks of mountains resounded, as did the depths of the sea with her immortal voice. And the lady mother, Demeter, heard her, and a sharp echo seized her heart. The headband on her hair she tore off with her own immortal hands and threw a dark cloak over her shoulders. She sped off like a bird, soaring over land and sea, looking and looking, but no one was willing to tell her the truth. Not one of the gods, not one of the mortal humans, not one of the birds, messengers of the truth. Thereafter, for 9 days did the lady Demeter wander all over the earth, holding torches ablaze in her hand. Not once did she take of ambrosia and nectar sweet to drink in her grief, nor did she bathe her skin in water. But when the 10th bright dawn came upon her, Hecate came to her, holding a light ablaze in her hands. She came with a message, and she spoke up, saying to her, "Lady Demeter, bringer of Horai, giver of splendid gifts, which one of the gods who dwell in the sky, or which one of the mortal humans seized Persephone and brought grief to your Philostomos? I heard the sounds, but I did not see with my eyes who it was, so I quickly came to tell you everything without error." So spoke Hecate, but she was not answered by the daughter Demeter of Rhea with the beautiful hair. Instead, Demeter joined her and quickly set out with her, holding torches ablaze in her hands. They came to Helios, the seeing eye of gods and men. They stood in front of his chariot team, and the resplendent goddess asked this question: "Helios, show me respect, god to goddess. If ever I have pleased your heart and Thumos in word or deed, it is about the girl born to me, a sweet young seedling, renowned for her beauty, whose piercing cry I heard resounding through the boundless ether, as if she were being forced. I did not see it with my eyes. I turn to you as one who ranges over all the earth and sea as you look down from the bright ether with your sunbeams. Tell me, without error, whether you have by any chance seen my Philon child, and who has taken her away from me by force, against her will, and then gone away. Tell me which one of the gods or mortal humans did it." So she spoke, and the son of Hyperion answered her with these words: "Daughter of Rhea with the beautiful hair, Queen Demeter, you shall know the answer, for I greatly respect you and feel sorry for you as you grieve over your child, the one with the delicate ankles. No one else among all the immortals is responsible except the cloud gatherer Zeus himself, who gave her to Hades as his beautiful wife. So he gave her to his own brother, and he, Hades, heading for the misty realms of darkness, seized her as he drove his chariot, and as she screamed out loud, 'But I urge you, goddess, stop your loud cry of lamentation. You should not have an anger without bounds, all in vain. It is not unseemly to have, of all the immortals, such a son-in-law as Hades, the one who makes many Semata. He is the brother of Zeus, whose seed is from the same place. And as for time, he has his share, going back to the very beginning when the three-way division of inheritance was made. He dwells with those whose king he was destined by lot to be. So saying, he shouted to his horses, and they responded to his command as they swiftly drew the speeding chariot like long-winged birds. And she, Demeter, was visited by grief that was even more terrifying than before. Makes you think of the hound of Hades. Her anger at the one who was known for his dark clouds, the son of Kronos, she shunned the company of gods and lofty Olympus. She went away, visiting the cities of humans with all their fertile land holdings, shading over her appearance for a long time. Not one of men looking at her could recognize her. Not one of women either, who are accustomed to wear their waistbands low slung. Until one day, she came to the house of bright-minded Chelios, who was at the time ruler of Elysius, fragrant with incense. She sat down near the road, sad in her Philon heart, at the well called Parthenion, where the people of the polis used to draw water. She sat in the shade under the thick grove of an olive tree, looking like an old woman who had lived through many years and who was deprived of giving childbirth and of the gifts of Aphrodite, lover of garlands in the hair. Thank you.
Oh, Queen. At first, an instantaneous shock I, from the history of thy woes, received. Now I am sensible my fears were groundless. But frequently, the second thoughts of man are more discreet. For there is nothing strange, naught in thy sufferings foreign to the course of nature. Thee, the goddess in her rage invades. Thou lovedst, and why should this surprise? Many as well as thee have done the same. Art thou resolved to cast thy life away because thou lovedst? How wretched were the state of those who love and shall hereafter love, if death must thence ensue. For though too strong to be withstood, when she with all her might assails us, Venus gently visits those who yield. But if she light on one who soars with proud and overweening views too high, as thou mayest well conceive, to utter scorn such she exposes. Through the boundless tracts of air she glides and reigns midst ocean's waves. All things from her their origin derive. 'Tis she that in each breast the genial seeds of potent love infuses, and from love descends each tribe that fills the peopled earth. Thy, whom with ancient writings have conversed and ever dwell among the tuneful nine, know how to Theban Semele's embrace flew amorous Jove, how bright Aurora stole young Cephalus and placed among the gods the object of her passion. Yet in heaven they still reside, where unabashed they meet their kindred gods. These gods, because they feel a sympathetic wound, I deem, indulge their weakness. And wilt thou refuse to bear like imperfections? Nature, on these terms, decreed thou from thy father shouldst receive thy being. Look for other gods, or yield submission to these laws. Hast thou observed how many husbands, men who are endued with a superior wisdom, when they see the nuptial bed by secret lust defiled, appear as though they saw not, and how oft the fathers, if their sons transgress, convive at their unhappy passion. To conceal unseemly actions is no trifling part of human wisdom, nor should man his life form with too great precision, for the roof, the covering from the storm, the builder leaves less fair, less highly finished. If immersed in evils as great as thou hast described, how canst thou hope to escape? But if thy virtues, since thou art only human, far exceed thy failings, it is well with thee. Desist, O my loved daughter, from thy evil purpose, and cease to utter these reproachful words. For there is naught but contumelious pride in thy endeavour to be yet more perfect than the immortal gods. Endure thy passion with fortitude, since 'twas the will divine that thou shouldst love. But give a prosperous turn, if possible, to thy disease. For songs there are with magic virtues fraught, and words which soothe the soul. Hence an effectual cure may be obtained. In such discovery, man would long in vain to be busied. To our sex, if no spontaneous stratagem occur.
You shall hear all that has passed, being sharers in the event. At the dead of night, when the evening campfires no longer blazed, he grasped his two-edged weapon and seemed bent to sally upon some errand objectless. I, in surprise, said to him, "What dost thou, Ajax? Why thus unsummoned, either by the voice of messengers or any trumpet call, goest thou forth? Now the whole host is sleeping." But he, briefly in cant phrase, replied, "Woman, a woman should be seen, not heard." I held my tongue, and he rushed forth alone. What there befell him I truly cannot say, but he came in and brought, bound all together, bulls, herdsmen dogs, and fleecy spoil of sheep. Some he beheaded, of some their heads bent upward, he cut the throats and clave the chins in twain. And some he bound and tortured as if human, though it was cattle he fell on. And at last, rushing out through the door, he hurled up words to a phantom, some against Atrides, some about Ulysses, laughing out loud and long at all the outrage he had wreaked on them. Then darting back into the hut once more, hurled and by degrees, he comes to reason. When looking on the chamber filled with havoc, he shrieked and smote his head. Then he sat down, flinging himself among the weltering rack of sheep he had butchered, and clutched hold upon his hair with clenched fists. Since then, most of the time he sat, uttering no sound. After, he threatened me. 'Twas terrible. If I disclosed not all that had befallen and questioned me, what could have come to him? Oh, friends, in fear I told him the whole story, so far as well I knew it. Instantly he bursts out crying, lamentably cries, such as I never heard from him before, for clamor of the kind he ever taught belonged to base and pusillanimous spirits. Rather, suppressing all shrill outcries, he would groan, low, like the rumbling of a bull. Now, prostrate under such adversity, he, without meat or drink, sits on the ground among the beasts his edges dealt on, dumb. And plain it is, he meditates no good. That way at least his words and wailings tend. But oh, dear friend, for therefore was my errand, come in and help us. If by any means you have the power, for such men as he are conquered by the counsels of a friend.
Be calm then, and I'll go ahead. All the long years, when the hopeless war dragged along, we, unassuming, forgotten and quiet, endured without question, endured in our loneliness, all your incessant child's antics and riot. Our lips we kept tied, though aching in silence, though well all the while in our silence we knew how wretchedly everything still was progressing by listening dumbly the day long to you. For always at home, you continued discussing the war and its politics loudly. And we sometimes would ask you, our hearts deep with sorrowing, though we spoke lightly, happy to see, what's to be inscribed on the side of the treaty stone? What, dear, was said in the assembly today? Mind your own business, he'd answer me growlingly. Hold your tongue, woman, or else go away. And so I would hold it. Well, so I did nothing but sit in the house, feeling dreary and sigh, while ever arrived some fresh tale of decision, more foolish by far and presaging disaster. Then I would say to him, oh, my dear husband, why still do they rush on destruction the faster? At which he would look at me sideways, exclaiming, keep for your wed and your shuttle your care, or for some hours hence your cheeks will be sore and hot. Leave this alone. War is man's sole affair. He had no time had lent his intractable ears to absorb from our counsel one temperate word of advice, though kindly meant. But when at the last, in the streets, we heard, shouted, everywhere ringing the ominous cry, is there no one to help us, no savior in Athens? And no, there is no one, come back and reply. At once, a convention of all wives through Hellas here for a serious purpose was held, to determine how husbands might yet back to wisdom, despite their reluctance in time be compelled. Why then delay any longer? It's settled. For the future, you'll take up our old occupation. Now in turn, you're to hold tongue as we did and listen while we show the way to recover the nation.
There's nothing quite like ending with Lysistrata to make you think about everything that we've been through and that women went through in ancient Greece. Those four speeches were a really amazing juxtaposition of different positions and viewpoints. Suzanne, I see you're back. Jackie, if you want to join. One of the things I loved about it was the sort of riveting narration Rad gave us of the beginning of the hymn to Demeter. I've never heard that aloud, and I just had so many ideas about it. But I'd love to hear some of your first responses, how this contrasted with the first part or carried on from it. So Jackie, you start this time. What did this do to your mind?
Mind blown. Just want to say that. Yeah, I have to second your opinion about Rad's performance on. I've never heard that aloud either, and it was so gripping. Like I wanted to hear more. It was like cliffhanger. And I also thought it was really cool how the way the Clytemnestra speech is cut, so that we don't get to if, in isolation, and if you don't know the story, right? It's all very reasonable until they then, of course, tell you what their plan is. But up to that point, it's all very reasonable. So it's like, it's very interesting. The cut is really good. So to give you a sense of what women would feel in terms of constantly being left out of political decisions and that are impacting them, et cetera. And the other two speeches were again also just mind blowing. I had not heard the nurse in Hippolytus live either, and so that was kind of interesting as well. Yeah. So yeah, but I do think it does continue. I think it adds more, but it continues from the discussion about how women are impacted by particularly war-related decisions that are always being made by men, right, in these ancient Greek communities. So yeah, I thought that there's a continuity here. Yeah.
So
what
I know
about you, Suzanne?
Yeah, Suzanne, you've been thinking a lot about Demeter. How did the flow for you go from having that powerful opening through the next three speeches?
Oh, I loved it. I mean, it made me think I should read the hymn to Demeter more often out loud, because that's something to keep in mind as well, is that these are all songs, right? So everything, the hymn is just a different type of song, a song of praise to Demeter. And the thing that struck me a lot as well was just where is the point of view looking at these women and their experiences? And when the hymn, you're kind of back a little bit and seeing what's happening. And then, when the other characters, you're kind of like the nurse also is seeing what's happening, but is right there and is involved. And then Tecmessa, again, these are witnesses, the nurse and Tecmessa are witnesses. Lysistrata and Demeter are more, agents and actors in their characterization. And so, so that's kind of what I was thinking about, is where are we standing in relation to these women when we're listening to them or watching them, and also just the fact that these are all songs, and we would have probably, if there were music, been caught up in their experiences even beyond just the meaning, right? The music would have lifted us, and I don't know when it would have sounded dark or more bright or things like that. And finally, the thing that struck me in the hymn to Demeter is just the characterization of Persephone, and how much she's represented as this frivolous girl, right? This is the queen of the dead. Like, at what point does she make this conversion to, very fierce and fearsome, queen of the dead? But this is that moment before, which kind of reminds me a little bit of Medea, like in her different representations. We're not reading Medea today, but, like in the Argonautica, where she's a girl before it all plays out, but then in tragedy she becomes very, very serious.
So, given that these pieces have been put together in such an intricate way, I'd like to invite Leonie to come and join us now to talk a little bit about it, and then bring in the actors. So Leonie, I want to thank you for giving us this amazing meal of speeches and ideas. And I'd just like to, Suzanne and Jackie can ask questions too, but maybe you can start by saying what inspired you to put it together this way.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for this opportunity. The first part is when Lana at the Center for Hellenic Studies reached out and I looked at the body of work that had been done. You all have covered such a massive amount of the Greek canon within this series that I said, what's left? So that was the first inspiration, was to dig in and to see what hadn't been done as of yet. And I've always been connected to the world of the goddesses within the Greek canon, and also the women and how the women are portrayed in contrast to how women are treated how women were treated in the Greek society. So I wanted to find a way that we could dig into these pieces and have a lot of rich monologues with a lot of texture to it, but also where the discussion would be just as rich in speaking about the society and the connection to the characters. So that was the initial inspiration. It was a great opportunity for me to connect with actors that I've been hungry to work with for a very long time.
So Suzanne, Jackie, what are some of your questions? You now have the creator to speak to. What do you want to know from her?
Well, I really appreciate what Leonie just said about, this fascination with goddesses and women, because they aren't the same. They have different capabilities. But the other thing, what struck me about what you just said about, these like real women versus these women portrayed on stage or, in the hymn. And it just struck me like that the women are, as it seems like you're saying, they are bounded, right? They are bounded. Even the goddesses are bounded by the story frame that they're in, but they also represent boundaries, like of experience, right? These extremes as well. And so in a way, it's another marginalization of them. Like, even though they're powerful, they still are bounded.
Yeah, I have a question. I wanted to know, so the two that sort of stand out in terms of thematically odd in relation to everything else are the nurse and the nurse's speech, and I get the hymn to Demeter and the nurse. So why did you put those? Because the others we could sort of loop under war, whatever. But here you have the rape of Persephone and the nurse talking to Phaedra. So why did you pick those two out of the range of other options you had? And put them together, because it does add an interesting twist to everything. So I just wanted to know what was your thinking process there?
Yeah, so in the first set of monologues that we had, we saw clear connections, like they are literally directly connected to each other. The second one, when I was looking at the Ode to Demeter, there's a few different, you have the story that's being told, but you also have the way that it's described. It's almost like a praise piece. It's this honoring and connecting in a different way. And looking at that and how it showed the range of what a goddess can be, I was thinking of women in this society and how they operate through these pieces in a world where you praise goddesses, you praise women, you praise goddesses and the gods, and the goddesses and the gods rule. And that's something that's different. And how does that operate within? So looking at the nurse's piece and the connection to her being a caretaker but operating in her own way. So she's a caretaker, she's also in servitude, all these different layers, but she still does her own thing and finds license to do so. So really the second round was about the range of characters and the wide variety of what we can see and the roles that they had. We have queens, we have princesses, we have all these different characters, but nurse in this piece is one that we don't get to see often. And the fact that that's her name, that's the character's name. So I think that I wanted to really show that range.
Can I just mention one thing, about a nurse, or like, in relation to like war and things like that nurse isn't just a class distinction, that may also have been a captive woman. And so I feel like that maybe I don't know if that was part of your choosing that character, maybe, you felt like that class and identity was in there. I have a question for the actors as well.
Let's bring all the actors in. You got to put on your videos. I'd like to make sure that everybody gets one chance to speak, and you guys are so amazing. So Suzanne and Jackie, I'll let you question and I'll make sure we get everybody in.
Yeah, so that was so incredible. And every time I see you, the actors in this series, and you all today reminded me just how powerful that you are and bring this to life, even on a flat screen, right? Even on Zoom. And I just am so impressed with it. And I feel like every time, like, man, I got to up my Zoom game and to reach out and touch people in the way that you guys touched us in the audience. And one of the questions I had for you, because I know that tragedies aren't all that you perform. And does it feel different to you to do these speeches, like just the style or the types of emotions being represented by these women versus, say, more modern works that you may be performing in?
I don't know who wants to start.
I'll
Nori?
jump in. Yes, I'll jump in. I will say that honoring, it's definitely in the forefront of your head to honor the meter and the style in which they were written, and finding a sweet spot of where your own emotions, your own imprint, your own impression of what this goddess or woman is going through still honors the structure. And really, for me, the director actor process is a very important part of this, because their vision and the framework of their vision really informs me of where I need to go. Modern pieces, I feel, are a lot more loose, and I love coming back to just classics. To, in a way, for me, it instills the discipline of the art form that I feel can be ignored a lot, unfortunately. It's discipline of the voice, of the body, of just honoring what the writer has written, and in this case, writers that lived thousands of years ago. And it's always good to come back to the words. No matter what's going on, I have to come back and do these for those reasons, just as a part of loving the craft.
Thank you, Nori. Colleen, so Nori's been with us before, so is Tamieka and Evie, so I'll come to them, but Colleen, we've had several Clytemnestras in this series, and each time I'm just floored by the life and sort of vibrancy actors bring to her. What was sort of your approach to this character?
That's a good question, right? So I talked to Leonie about it, and I said, I just feel she feels a little modern to me, which could be, I don't know, debated. But I think I was bringing to it all of the women who have waited to check somebody, if that makes sense. You know, she had 10 years to get ready to let him have it, and she took her time. And there was something about that, Rich, I'm going to tell you my story, and you're going to listen. And I'm going to lie, and I'm going to kill you. Like, there's something so, I don't know. That's what I brought to it. Just that. And I asked Leonie, I said, how mad can I be? You know, did I miss him at all? You know, like, these are the things that I was thinking about. And then the revenge piece of it, you know, I'm always mindful of the fact that this was written with the intention of having men perform it. So I'm always thinking about the fact that there's a little bit of a lack of authenticity of of a woman's actual voice. But there's something so beautiful about the fact that men who are typically more, I mean, they wrote all the women to center them, you know. I get to really bring what they bring to that. So, I mean, I was excited to get this piece because I said, oh, it feels very like it could be on TV right now. The plotting and the conniving, and Leonie said something, and he pulls up with this girl on the chariot, and I said, he did, right? And she's just sitting there looking at me. So it was just something fun about that. I don't know. I just tried to make it feel present, because when I read it, I said, oh, this has relevance just in that way, you know. So that's kind of what I brought to it. I know there's heaviness. I know he killed her daughter. There's a lot of that it could be really literal, but I was like, in this little snapshot, out of context piece, what is fun about it to me? And that's what it was.
And I really, what I liked about your portrayal is you could feel the anger and the rage, but it was constrained and targeted in a way that was terrifying, right? Like
that's
Clytemnestra,
what I thought about.
Yeah.
That's what I thought about when I was listening to Suzanne and Jackie say, the women have these huge displays of emotion. And I started to judge myself. I was like, oh, I was trying to constrain her fury. So thank you for saying that. I just think that that's such a challenge. And because I don't get to just go off, right? Well, I have to methodically lure him into his demise.
And I think that's part of the tension of Clytemnestra as a character. She's a queen. Right, she's in charge. She's navigated all of this, and that's what's different about the Aeschylean Clytemnestra and later ones from the Homeric one, where she might just be a pawn. Right, so I really love that. But we have a second Clytemnestra in the house today, and that's Kim Bay. Right, so I mean, your Clytemnestra is at a very years before. Right, the sort of her origin story as a villain is this terrible moment, and you also plied that space between restraint and just sort of loss. What was that like, and what were you bringing to it?
Yeah, actually, I love it. It's very juicy, and I love the journey. I'm familiar with Clytemnestra through Electra, and so it was nice to approach it before she gets to that Electra moment of the murder. I felt like, and Leonie was also good to remind me that this is her mind starting to click. So she starts in one place, which is the murder of her daughter, or the potential, or getting to the murder of her daughter, to the point where she's plotting what comes next. And I love that journey that she takes from being, if you will, I don't want to call her a victim. She's hardly a victim, but being victimized by the moment to making that stand. No, I'm not satisfied with this. And that her mind is starting to click as to what she can do next.
And I love that you bring that up, because one of the things we forget about the ancient performances is that the audiences knew the full story. Right. So part of their tension in watching it is seeing how much the performance echoes what happens later. Right. Yeah. And so I think your reading of that is just brilliant there. So I thank you for it. Right. And so what you two Clytemnestras did, going through that emotion and really inhabiting the characters, contrasts with what Rad has to do with the narrator. So Rad, you have three Homerists who watched you today, right? Jackie, Suzanne, and me. And honestly, I thought you were going to do the whole hymn, and I was hoping for it. I was like, we're going to run over because we got to get to the end of this, because this is the best thing I've heard in weeks. Not to slight anybody else here, but I'm just so used to reading the hymn, and we forget that this is a sacred song that people sang every year. So how did you approach this very odd task that Leonie asked of you?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I mean, I feel like it's kind of like a storyteller dream to get to inhabit the multiple perspectives, the multiple realities that are baked into stories, especially to good stories. So I was really excited by it. Similarly to what I think it was Nori was saying, that's what feels so good often about diving into these ancient or classical texts, is that there's just so many layers and so much socio-political context that you can play with. And I really like bringing a kind of modern perspective to them as much as I can, so that the words and the ideas and the themes feel really fresh to our ears today. So it was really fun.
Well, I think you were marvelously successful with it. So thank you. On the other end, so the dry narrator, becomes sort of enlivened by your work. And then I don't know if Ayanda is still there, but we get Cassandra all the time. Right. And every Cassandra is different. So Ayanda, part of what I loved about your Cassandra is sort of the restraint again, sort of working through the prophecy, the inspiration, but really sort of being a real person instead of sort of a caricature. What sort of view did you have of Cassandra as a character when you took her on?
It was very interesting for me to do this monologue. I had to put my real situation into it. The fact that there's a lot that we have to share, but not everything that we say is entirely, received. So I had to kind of draw my own frustrations to make it real for me, draw my own frustrations about what I experience as an African woman, as African women. For the longest time, we've always had something to say, but in our African tradition, we've been raised to not say much. And now that we say something, we actually get beaten up for it. So I had to draw from that frustration. I had to bring the African woman's experience of our culture, which needs to change a lot, into that in order for me to be able to connect to it. So it became true for me, that frustration of saying something and not being heard and not being listened to. But also we have moments where we lose our minds as well. Ancestrally, we lose our minds a lot. So I also drew from that. So it was really pretty interesting. It was quite a journey for me. And it was one of the things where I was excited to be ugly as an actor.
And it was powerfully so. And I really thank you for bringing those worlds together, because I think you are spot on in finding those continuities and experiences. And part of what makes Cassandra, I think, such a powerful and attractive is the wrong word, but compelling character. And so we're rounding near to the end, but I want to make sure we talk to everybody. Tamieka, I always love seeing you play these characters. Were you reluctant to come back to Hecuba and to think about because it's a terrible story she has. How do you go back to that place and stay sort of whole?
Well, from where I am right now, just in my own human experience, and connecting with her, thinking about, you have to, when you're raised a certain way, or you're in certain environments where you have to act a certain way, you have to wear a certain mask to get your point across. You have to make sure that you're seen a certain way, and if you're seen differently, then you're shunned, or you're put down, or you're it's just not good. So coming back to this from when we first did it the first time, I'm a different person now, so approaching it than I was before. So being almost 2 years into the pandemic, I'm approaching it from where I am right now, mentally and emotionally. So, yeah.
Thank you. And as always, it's a delight to see. And I like, that you're mentioning the sort of that tension between the iterative process of returning to the same characters, but also in no way being the same person, is part of what I think gave Greek tragedy its power on stage in the ancient world. So before I go to Lysistrata to sort of close things out, I want to go back to Evie. Evie, I think you may have logged the most characters in the series so far. And how has your time apart from us, but also going into the second year of the pandemic, changed the way you approach this process?
Oh yeah, it's always a delight and a pleasure to come back. It's so nice, and it's just amazing to be part of an evening that's so many different monologues, and lots of people have picked up on, so different in theme, in feel, where the character's coming from. That's felt really lovely, just to see that range and hear all of these different voices. And I suppose, inevitably you get something different from the evening than you would from just kind of looking at one play and a through line. But it's just been lovely to be a part of it, as ever.
It was nice to see you again, and disappointing that nobody burst into your screen. But that's the way it works. So Nhlangothi, you had the most different role on paper from the rest, but the way you burst in with it, we all think of Lysistrata as being a comedy, but you weren't funny, and I don't mean that in a bad way. You made me think, wow, this is comedy, serious stuff, not for the first time, but for this one. So is that what you were thinking when you're approaching the role? How much did you know about the play? What was going on through your mind?
You know, I will confess, I'm going to start off by confessing things I should not confess, that Lysistrata, of all the classical plays, is not my favorite because of how I see women are, how women are portrayed. And well, it's written by a man, so there it is. So when I saw what Lyonnais had planned, I thought, oh, what a great opportunity to just get it all out there, because I find humor in women who are strong and women who take nothing from anyone and will let everyone know what they're thinking and feeling after being pushed around for a while. So for me, it was about power, definitely about power and giving voice to those who are seen as weak, who end up becoming the ones in power by force or however. So I approached it with first, a lot of fun, because I love what I do. I can't believe this is what I do for a living, but also just to me, it just sounded like someone speaking today. And that's what makes, to me, a classical play, a classic. If you can still read it today and find all the themes and connect them to what's going on in the world today, which is what I did for myself, then job has been done here in terms of the writing.
And I think I absolutely agree with you that, Lysistrata is a really difficult play to deal with, because so much of the humor, like the women are the joke, they're not in on the joke. So it takes a really sensitive direction to bring it in together. And it was great and surprising, and I think a testament to the deft work that Lyonnais did in putting these things together. So I want to end by thanking all the performers. Jackie had to leave. Suzanne's still here. Lyonnais, you've given us a gift. We have a few announcements before we sort of close up shop. Number one is that we'll be gathering together again in 2 weeks for a special performance of a new play by Chaz, a libretto called the Laodamiad. And I think we can put a video in the link on video link on YouTube, so you can see a preview of that. It's going to be music and fun, and that's all I really know about it. So if it's not as musical, it's not as much fun, you can blame me, but I think it's going to be amazing. In addition, we're going to be running another competition for students at universities and high schools to perform and send us videos of them. We got a nice grant from the SCS for that. And Paul, who can't be here today because he's actually on a stage in something covered in glitter. He wouldn't show me a picture, so I can't attest to anything more than that. Wanted me to make sure that we put up the links again to the Bada course that he's going to be running in Oxford in Greece on performing in the ancient world, and the fundraiser platform that we have for creating the master courses that we're talking about to include people like Evelyn Miller, and to train people to think about how to perform texts in the ancient world and talk about them. Before we sign off, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the entire crew who helped make this possible. Paul, who's not here, Omani makes it work, Lana Coley, Keith, Janet, Sarah, Elen, the rest of our producers, Amy Pistone, Ali, who puts the posters together, John Coley, who makes the amazing images that makes them happen, and everybody else I might have forgotten. I didn't mention the Center for Hellenic Studies or the Cosmos Society at the beginning of the day because I'm out of practice. Again, thank you to everybody for watching and for being here. Stay safe. For all of you traveling over the next few weeks, cover your faces. Right. Pandemic is still happening. I want everyone to be back here in 2 weeks' time. Hearty and hail. Have a good night.